Hello everyone, let's talk about the unit circle. So, we're going to actually evaluate some trig functions using the ideas that we've been talking about with reference angles. First thing, let's look at this triangle here. If this is on the unit circle, then the diagonal, the hypotenuse is 1 because the radius of the circle is 1. And if I said, what's the sine of t? The sine would be opposite over hypotenuse. Y over 1 is just y. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. X over 1 is x. And that's the really big idea here. If I'm asking you for the cosine of an angle, I'm asking you for the x-coordinate. And if I ask you for the sine of an angle, I'm asking you for the y-coordinate. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, so that's y over x. And we're not going to get into tangent today, but we will talk about it in the next lesson. Same thing with the reciprocals. Cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so that would be 1 over y. Secant would be 1 over x, and then this would be x over y. Cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. Oh, you can't see that. There you go. Okay. Now, all of the unit circle that we've been working on comes from these two special rights. So let me just remind you, if you have a 45, 45, 90 triangle and the diagonal is 1, then the x and the y are both radical 2 over 2. If you have a 30 degree and a 30, 60, 90 triangle, the short leg is 1/2 and the long leg is radical 3 over 2. You just need to remember across from 30 is 1/2, across from 45 is radical 2 over 2, and across from 60 is radical 3 over 2. Now, every triangle I draw is going to be opposite one of those reference angles. So this one says 300 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate 300 degrees from 0, so that's around like this. And remember, 360 is all the way around, so the question is, how many degrees from 360 is 300? And that would be 60 degrees. The reference angle is 60 degrees. And now look, that's this triangle. It's oriented slightly differently, but across from 60 is radical 3 over 2, and across from, this would be 30, is 1/2. Since we're in the fourth quadrant, x is positive and y is negative. So now if I say, what's the cosine of 300 degrees? The cosine is the x-coordinate, so the cosine is 1/2. And if I say, what's the sine of 300 degrees? That's the y value, negative radical 3 over 2. Now, it's not super helpful to have a calculator, but sometimes when you're getting started, it is nice to check. If I say, what's the cosine of 300? The cosine of 300 should be positive 1/2, and it is. And the sine of 300 should be negative radical 3 over 2, which as a decimal is that 0.866. Oh, well, what did I do? Oh, duh. Let's do that again. Sine of 300, negative radical 3, I put the minus underneath, over 2. See? So I know I did this right. Okay, the x is the cosine and the y is the sine. You have to draw your triangle, figure out your reference angle, then you can label it, and then you have x and y. So I'm just going to do a bunch of these. 315 is in the fourth quadrant, and anything that ends in a 5 has to be a 45-degree reference angle. So if it's the 45, that means x and y are both radical 2 over 2, except in the fourth quadrant, y is negative. So the cosine is positive radical 2 over 2, and the sine is negative radical 2 over 2. 150 is in the second quadrant, and 150 is 30 degrees away from 180. So the reference angle is 30. That means the short leg is the y and the long leg is the x. In the second quadrant, x is negative. So the cosine of 150 is negative radical 3 over 2, and the sine of 150 is 1/2. 330, you go almost all the way around, but you didn't make it to 360. You're 30 degrees short, so if that's 30, the y is across from 30 is 1/2, it's negative, and the x, the long leg, is the cosine, radical 3 over 2, negative 1/2. Negative 90, so negative 90 is this way, that's straight down, you got to be careful. These are always tricky. The x-coordinate is 0, the y-coordinate is negative 1, so this is 0, negative 1, and I'll check that one too. If I say the cosine of negative 90, I get 0, and the sine of negative 90 is negative 1. Cool. 225, you know it's got to be 45-degree reference angle because it ends in a 5, and that's in the third quadrant. So if it's a 45-degree reference angle, it's the isosceles. They're both radical 2 over 2. And in the third quadrant, they're both negative. negative radical 2 over 2, negative radical 2 over 2. 60 degrees is in the first quadrant right up here, and obviously from 0, that's 60-degree reference angle. So if it's 60-degree reference angle, the long leg is the y, the short leg is the x, so the cosine is 1/2, and the sine is radical 3 over 2. That's pretty much it for your basics evaluating sine and cosine, and that's what your delta math is on. So make sure you guys get your homework finished, and make sure you smash that like and subscribe.